The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Sarah Lugers. I'm the Director of Communications for the Gold Standard. I'll be facilitating the discussion today. And it's indeed quite an exciting one. As I'm sure you're well aware, renewable energy is accelerating at what seems to be almost an exponential rate. We see more than 100 companies committed to RE100. We're seeing new commitments announced what seems like every day. And so this is a big opportunity to leverage this momentum and to maximize the positive impacts that can be achieved through market instruments in renewable energy. So we see this as an exciting development for the range of you on the line, from corporates to consultants, project developers, and project beneficiaries on the ground, and indeed all of us for climate security. So I'll quickly run through the agenda today and what you can expect. We have 60 minutes. We have 3 presentations, and then we'll follow that up with a question and answer session. To begin, we'll hear from Jared Breslowski, the Secretary General of REX International, who will talk about why the origin of this collaboration was initiated and how this new label can help accelerate the renewable transition, moving from consumer choice to really increasing and maximizing impact. And then we'll hear from Owen Hewlett, the Chief Technical Officer from Gold Standard. He'll talk about what's new and different and cool about this new label, how it works technically, and what can be claimed. And then finally, we'll turn it over to John Autenrieth, from a portfolio manager for the South Pole Group, who will address the business case, so why companies should care, and even more importantly, why and how they can gain value from investing in the renewable transition using this premium label. And then, as mentioned, we'll turn it over to you and have sufficient time for Q&A. And just to begin, it's worth spending just a moment for those of you on the line who might not be familiar with Gold Standard to give us a little introduction. Gold Standard was founded in 2003 by WWF and other international NGOs who really wanted to see the highest levels of environmental integrity and sustainable development at the core of climate protection projects and carbon markets. And so we've been doing that over the past 15 years, really serving as the benchmark for quality in climate protection and development projects. And then in 2015, with the onset of the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals, we began looking at our own standards, which had been 3 disparate standards, from energy to land use and forest, and a standard in water. And we brought those together and integrated them into a new and integrated standard to quantify, certify, and maximize impacts towards climate security and the SDGs. And so that's why this new label that we'll talk about today is possible. So we still operate in carbon markets, acting as a premium product for carbon credits. We're moving into other quantification of other SDG impacts, from gender to health, and offering new market instruments like the renewable energy label that we'll talk about here today. And so with that introduction, I'd like to turn it over to Jared to tell you about how this partnership got started. Jared, over to you. Jared, I don't hear you. I'm not sure.
My apologies. I was talking into mute this whole time. So I'll start from the beginning. Hi there. This is Jared from REX International. Thank you all for joining today. I'm going to be running actually over 3 different topics in my presentation. I'm going to do this rather quickly. The first is a bit of background about REX International and, of course, the cooperation that we have with other energy attribute tracking systems. The second portion I'll be talking about is how the international REC standard functions nationally and internationally. And then I'll be focusing as well about the rationale for cooperation with Gold Standard on developing essentially their renewable electricity labeling scheme and how this fits into the current framework of renewable electricity procurement. REX International, we were the initiators of the Guarantee of Origin system in Europe. Many years ago, we believed that standardization at the European level, this was about 15 years ago, was important for the development of renewable electricity procurement options. Essentially, we believe at its core that standardization simplifies the choice for consumers. It allows for more simplified procurement of renewable electricity, and in the end, it makes it beneficial to provide that demand side growth aspects when it comes to the renewable electricity market. REX International are experts in the attribute tracking systems, as we mentioned, and we've also been working with consumers to make sure that there are standardized claims internationally as well. In this aspect, we work with RE100 on the technical advisory group and also are an advisor to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Scope 2 guidance document that was published in 2015. And we've worked with CDP on their methodology as well. So maybe this is an important aspect to mention because actually I've mentioned two forms of standardization. One is, of course, standardizing the tracking system itself, you could say, so the instrument used to procure renewable electricity. But another aspect is as well standardization of the claims that are being made. And I think this is also a role that labels clearly play as well. So it's about standardization on both sides, you could say. If you go to the next slide, and you can see, of course, speaking about standardization, we've seen internationally that there's the Guarantee of Origin system in Europe. We also have the REC system in the US. And internationally, there's also a developing standard, the International REC standard. So as you can see in this slide, the International REC standard is nothing more than a standardized system for the implementation of REC systems or energy attribute certificate systems internationally. The International REC standard is a nonprofit organization that sets rules and regulations for the use of attribute tracking certificates internationally. So in locations where there is no nationally recognized or functional energy attribute certificates in these countries or regions. The most important aspect, however, is that even though the standard and regulations are regulated internationally through a nonprofit organization, implementation is always done at a national level. So that means national issuers are authorized to essentially adhere to the IREC standard. These national issuers are elected to this position by national governments, national stakeholders, or in market parties as well. So at the moment, if you go to the next slide, you can see some of the developments in these standards internationally. Now, I do say my apologies. I'm not the best with graphic design, so next time I'll have to get this a little bit better prepared. But you can see in purple, of course, this is where the U.S. or North American REC system is in place. The standard here is held by the U.S. Department of Energy in many ways that regulates the rules and trade for REC certificates in North America. In Europe, we have the EXO system. That's the European Energy Certificate System. This is controlled by a nonprofit organization, the Association of Issuing Bodies. And then in dark blue, you see the areas where an issuer has been authorized to adhere to the international REC standard. So there's a number of different regions where this takes place, and a number of different areas where issuers have been authorized to implement the international REC standard. If you go to the next slide, this is actually my final slide, and I said it was going to be a little bit quick, but I think it's good that we have time for Q&A as well. The need for a label is quite clear. From REX International, we've been working on a document called the Renewable Electricity Good Practice, the REGP. The purpose of the REGP is to really lay out what is good practice within the renewable electricity procurement, how consumers can procure renewable electricity in a reliable and robust way. But this isn't necessarily the goal of most consumers, I would say. Most consumers are not looking for good practice, they're looking for best practice. And that's where labeling systems come into place. And the REGP picks, or the Renewables Good Practice Guidance document, puts a significant role on the importance of third-party labeling schemes. These third-party labeling schemes allow for concepts of additionality, concepts of new build criteria, or what was previously referred to as additionality criteria, to be implemented into these labels as well. So I think this is really a quite integral part in the future development of energy attribute certificates internationally. You're seeing that consumers are demanding for these kind of high quality products, these additional new build criteria, sustainability criteria, and that's what labels can bring. Labels also bring another added benefit as well, and that is that it helps to ensure that all of the other criteria was in place. So that necessary criteria to ensure that consumers are making the good, conducting good practice as well, above best practice, is in many ways ensured by the use of sustainability labels. So we've been very much supporting the gold standard in the development of their labeling system. We believe that this is a step in the right direction. It's a step towards standardization, both at the system level and at the claims level. And this is definitely something that is beneficial for not only the consumer, but also the renewables producers in these different countries and regions around the world. With that, I will cut myself off and I will give the time to the next speaker. So you can just go to the next slide. Yeah, and I'll say,
Jared.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, thank you very much, Owen. And I'll give the floor to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Jared, and sorry to tread on your toes. Thanks, Sarah, for the introduction. So for those that don't know me, I'm Owen Hewlett, the Chief Technical Officer at Gold Standard. I have a little bit of a cold today, I'm afraid, so hopefully my voice is clear enough. But my responsibility at the foundation is really to lead the development of new standards, tools, guidelines, and product innovations, including the development of this Gold Standard Renewable Energy label. Sarah made a good introduction earlier to our new standard, which is Gold Standard for the Global Goals. Gold Standard began life as a labeling organization in the carbon market, specifically for CDM credits, before moving on to issuing voluntary emission reduction credits as well. And throughout its history, really, there's been examples of Gold Standard being asked to provide that quality labeling service to other market commodities and products, and in particular, renewable energy certificates, which is where this is coming from today. Gold Standard for the Global Goals really made that feasible for the first time in an efficient best practice way, because the new standard doesn't assume that a project will follow a certain methodology or seek a particular product. It first requires a project to meet quality criteria, and I'll come on to those in a second, and then has much more flexibility to choose if and which methodologies and products to seek. So a renewable energy project under Gold Standard historically could really only have sought carbon credits. Now that's no longer assumed, and there are other products available, notably the renewable energy labels, which we're discussing today. So it's a really exciting time for Gold Standard, much more flexibility for projects. And I think from a mission perspective, it allows Gold Standard to extend the reach of best practice in our key core principles, which I'll describe in a moment, into other markets, whereas Jared has already highlighted are clearly needed. So the first thing to say really is that, the third bullet point really, I suppose, is that this is a label, not a renewable energy certificate in and of itself. We really wanted to work with high quality partners such as IREX, and that's the reason for that predominantly is we feel that the tracking mechanisms that exist and that are credible are already doing a great job, and Gold Standard doesn't necessarily add the most value there. But where we do add value, and I'm just referring back to something Jared said, which is really about procuring high quality products with sustainability and new build criteria built in, as well as third party monitoring, reporting and verification. Well, that could be a description of Gold Standard. So our core standard requires the inclusion of stakeholders. It requires that stakeholders are consulted and involved in design and have an ongoing mechanism to feedback. It has very rigorous and robust environmental, economic and social safeguards to protect project participants in the environment. and it requires the contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals, which I think aligns with global momentum and the reporting many people are making. So in terms of the ensuring finance goes to new generation, well, only new projects are eligible for gold standard. So the maximum age of a gold standard project is that the stakeholder consultation that we require must take place no earlier than a year before investment. And so if you're beyond that window, the oldest you can really be is a year before you be outside the window for gold standard. And our maximum certification cycle is 15 years. So in fact, we're well within industry benchmarks for newness in that sense. And then the third party MRV gold standard is committed to quality audit and assessment on site and tracking and regular verification of our projects. And I think all of those things combined, the verification and the safeguards and the social inclusivity, really point to a very robust, highly reputable label that that buyers can rely on to safeguard their reputation. So very much about safeguarding reputation and committing to best practice. That's really what the label stands for. In terms of the claim that can be made, so it's really focused around SDG 7 and the development of clean energy. You can, well, we will only label renewable energy certificates that are capable of being counting towards Scope 2 reductions for RE100. We are collaborating with IREX. The idea is that Gold Standard could develop labels for other renewable energy and electricity products in future, but we commence life labeling IREX because we really want to learn from a high quality partner and ensure we get this right. But we are interested in other areas of demand. If people see that Gold Standard should label other products, then we'd be interested in that conversation. The traditional kind of principle of additionality you might be familiar with from the carbon markets is optional rather than mandatory for our renewable energy label. I'll come on to a later slide where I'll demonstrate how a project might choose to issue credits and renewable energy labels from the same project. But if a project wishes to prove its additionality, that's possible, but we don't require it. So we're really looking to promote choice there. We require newness, but don't necessarily mandate additionality, although that's an option that projects can choose to prove should buyers want that. We do insist on contributions to at least 3 sustainable development goals, one of which can be SDG 7, but you can imagine that a project might contribute to other SDGs such as life on land or good employment, and that can either be part of the project's natural development cycle, so something already embedded in the way the project works, or a project can choose to add further initiatives to its development. So for example, a project that's keen to focus on gender issues could apply our forthcoming gender responsive guidelines, and in that sense would be able to, for example, add programs of inclusion and equality that kind of build on the project that aren't necessarily intrinsically included. So there's lots of scope to work within and beyond on a given project, and for buyers to really examine what a project is delivering when they're choosing to buy REX labeled by Gold Standard. And I'd just like to draw attention as well to our corporate climate leadership best practice. So we've worked closely with our colleagues and partners at CDP and WWF on those climate leadership best practice guidelines, which are currently out to consultation. And perhaps Sarah can say a couple of words at the end of the presentations just to point you in the right direction for that. Just a short overview really of some of the eligibility criteria for projects. So this is about grid connected renewable energy, and as I say, we label IREX, so really IREX eligibility apply as well, but typical projects would include wind or solar or hydro, noting that we have some pretty stringent hydro restrictions, particularly at the large scale end. Projects really must submit to Gold Standard within a year of committing to expenditure. That protects the newness factor, and our maximum certification period, just to reiterate, is 15 years. And then, as I say, really the other limitations and eligibility criteria are built from our colleagues at IREX. Oops, I've gone off too many slides. Sorry, excuse me. So really just to highlight some of the key features again, I mentioned the inclusivity of stakeholders, the rigorous safeguards and the contribution to the SDGs, but Gold Standard, as I mentioned, also has a robust MRV system requiring third-party audit and peer review by Gold Standard. So by purchasing a Gold Standard labeled REC, you can be sure that it's been the investment has been visited on site by a qualified and competent auditor and has been peer reviewed by Gold Standard as well. And it also has inputs ongoing from its stakeholders affected by the investment as well. So really all of that is monitored and tracked and regularly verified. So as a reputational protection instrument, I think it's remarkably robust in that sense. And I would say that in investments in parts of the world which are still developing, so you might be investing in LDC perhaps, or more likely kind of lower middle income country investments where typically routinely stakeholders are not included and safeguards might not be as robust, then the Gold Standard label really provides that reassurance. And then lastly, just to highlight that we operate a fully transparent third-party registry where all of our commodities are issued to, and you can see the details of any project and how it's been verified up to the latest reports. So fully traceable to individual projects. In terms of the way the standard actually works, I won't dwell on this too much. If you go to our YouTube channel, you can see presentations there that explain Gold Standard for the global goals in more detail, but just very briefly, the box on the left there, the mandatory box, are the core principles and requirements for Gold Standard for the global goals and the particular rules we have around renewable energy activities. They're mandatory for all renewable energy investment projects through Gold Standard, so those have to be met. And that includes things like stakeholder inclusivity and safeguards. But then as you move to the right-hand side, the modules become more flexible and optional. So we will maintain our emission reduction methodologies and work with the CDM methodologies. And projects can choose to issue Gold Standard VERs and CER labels, so maintaining our role in the carbon markets. But by following our new renewable energy label requirements, we can also issue RECs labels. And probably one further innovation to highlight really is that little plus there on the right-hand side. A project can issue both from the same project, and I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail in a second. So what in terms of gets physically issued, or actually issued by Gold Standard is a kind of shadow label. So the IREC will obviously be issued by IRECs themselves into their own registry, and there's functionality and capacity there to note a label on an individual IREC back to Gold Standard. But Gold Standard will also operate a tracking mechanism like a dummy label system in its own registry as well, to be monitoring and checking and being absolutely sure there's no errors of issuance on our side. So fully traceable across both registries. And as we work over time, the systems and simplicity of that will really bear fruit, I think. And then, I've gone, sorry, one slide back. And then just finally, just to say, so I mentioned that you can issue Gold Standard renewable energy certificate labels and carbon credits from the same project. And that's really demonstrated here, but you can't issue both from the same megawatt hour. And so we'll be tracking the megawatt hours produced by the devices in a given project, and the project developer can choose flexibly whether to issue carbon credits or renewable energy certificate labels, and there is some capacity to be able to cancel and reverse that decision and reissue as the alternative product. And that really gives projects the flexibility to enter and operate the markets that are most likely to make their projects sustainable. So really leveraging both markets in that sense. For the first time as well, the little line on the right hand side there, so Gold Standard has, because of the carbon credit nature of the commodities we've issued, has traditionally issued credits in arrears. So you would verify a given monitoring period, say 2 years ago, say 2015 to 2017, and we would issue carbon credits for that period. The RECs market is much more on demand and forward looking than that, and so we wanted to recognize that difference. And so at any given verification event, you can issue credits or REC labels in arrears, as we always have done, but we'll also give you a forward window of 12 months during which any IRECs that are issued can also receive a Gold Standard label. So just to be clear, they're not validated RECs. That's never going to be something that either of our organizations, I think, would endorse. Rather, it's a kind of forward window during which our label can be applied. So the REC would still be issued for a real megawatt hour, and a label would still be issued in real time by Gold Standard. It just gives people that kind of more on-demand approach, really, without having to re-verify every time you want to issue something. I think it also helps deal with the challenge of sell-by dates within the RECs market as well, wherein a REC over a certain age becomes either cancelled or effectively worthless anyway. And so we really wanted to address that with that forward window. But I can explain that to more detail in for anybody that's keen to understand that a little bit more. And that's really everything that I wanted to convey today. And I hand over to Jan at our partners at South Pole, and look forward to hearing Jan's thoughts on the marketability of the product.
Hello, everyone. Also, a very warm welcome from my side. We're very happy to have the opportunity to speak on this topic, which has been in South Pole's interest for quite a few years now. Let me just see if I can proceed to the next slide here. It doesn't show. Oh, here we go. Thanks for forwarding. For those who don't know us, we are a global sustainability provider in the space of climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. We have our headquarters in Zurich, Switzerland, while the majority of our staff is located around Southeast Asia and Latin America, where most of our project activity and groundwork actually takes place. This forwarding thing doesn't really work. Thanks. South Pole Group is a profit for purpose company and entirely owned by employee shareholders. We've been in the business for about 11 years now, and we are very proud of the impact that we achieved in that time, providing our clients with the best and most impactful solutions available. Allow me to move forward. Allow me to set the scene with the question, where do the motives for corporate renewable purchase actually come from? Well, the rise of RECs and PPAs and other forms of renewable energy solutions on the global agenda reflect the worldwide consensus that was achieved in Paris at the COP21. There is a pressing need for more renewable energy in order to keep on track and fulfill the goals outlined by the Paris Agreement. Interestingly, we see the private corporates becoming the main driver in this process here. As Sarah mentioned at the beginning, 111 big brands joined the RE100, committing to a 100% switch to renewable energy. This is a very strong and important signal that helps to drive the demand, innovation, and investments of renewable energy. These private companies are important to the national and international development of the renewable energy markets, as they radiate confidence and courage, which the governments and some lagging economy sectors desperately need in this regard. On the next slide. So, what is the best way to procure power? Well, what is the best way to climb a mountain, you might ask? There are many techniques and they all get you there in the end, but not every technique suits everyone. Just like a company's USP or strategy or client segment is different from any other of the companies, also the electricity requirements of corporates are fundamentally different from each other. While we have seen in the past 2 years a steep increase of corporate PPAs, not every company suits such a setup. Especially the long time frame of 15+ years, or the minimum loads, or the capital requirements often disqualifies smaller companies from entering into a PPA. But also geographical or legislative challenges make PPAs a very complex affair. In fact, as we've seen in the past, in the last annual report from RE100, the participating members procure a mere 3.5% of their electricity through direct PPAs. Nearly 60% of their renewable energy is procured through unbundled energy attribute certificates, or EACs, such as RECs or guarantees of origin. These EACs can offer a suitable solution to comply with the company's pledge or commitments or reporting requirements. And this is the key point here, they can be instrumental to the impact a company aims to achieve. The difficulty, however, is to identify what types and origins of EACs, RECs, a company should choose in order to be aligned with the overall sustainability strategy and its further corporate values. So, where to find guidance? On the next slide. Since the 2015, the UN Sustainability Goals were embraced by corporate leaders as orientation points for corporate sustainability engagement, this is where the guidance could come from. The SDGs provide structure and targets for everyone, for both private and public action. The gold standard renewable energy label builds on this and brings these orientation points to the renewable energy market. South Pole is therefore very happy that gold standard provides such a framework and allows us to build renewable energy solutions that with the SDGs at their core. The slide here shows the findings of a 2016 study that assesses the support of SDGs by CEOs and sustainability professionals, including the weighing of importance to their operations. We see that climate action and clean energy are regarded as amongst the most important goals, but also it shows that the distribution of importance reaches into every single SDG. Because SDGs will guide government spending, so there are savings or revenues to be made for savvy businesses who simultaneously tackle these goals while maintaining their existing corporate objectives. This is where the SDGs translate into renewable procurement, because by contributing to the SDG agenda, a company will enhance its business goals and aspirations in the eye of governments and in the eye of an awakening global sector, business sector, you could say. Ultimately, having a long-term strategy, which at the national level is goal congruent with the government ambitions, makes business sense. This is why we regard SDGs, and with them the gold standard renewable energy label, as instrumental in a company's renewable energy strategy. Why do I say instrumental? The gold standard labels provide energy buyers with a clear instrument that allows them to align their power purchase with a wider sustainability strategy and the corporate values. This allows not only easier identification of renewable energy projects, but also facilitates clear and specific communications and reportings of impacts. Especially this last point is key in today's multi-layered interaction between companies and their clients, their investors, employees, and value chain partners. Gold standard label RECs, such as South Pole's Gold Power, not only provide the highest quality of renewable energy, but also measurable positive impacts on communities and the environment in developing countries. It combines robust verification and tracking of renewable energy, renewable electricity generation with social and environmental safeguards. This results in strong claims that are reportable under the most recognized frameworks and represent material leadership through significant contributions to the project operations. Allow me to, for a moment, put some meat on the bone and mention 3 projects of this class. The first one here is the TSE Bundle Solar in Thailand, which in a market dominated by coal and oil energy production offers an alternative to the local communities while providing jobs and skill development to the local communities. The next one has a more agricultural focus. It is the Nangong Biomass project in China, which supports clean energy in an area that is also predominantly powered by coal power plants. But it also has an effect of reducing the pollution and respiratory diseases from open field biomass burning while feeding back into the agricultural business and providing the ashes used from the residual biomass to be used by the farmers as fertilizers again. And the last example comes from Vietnam, where the Buckley wind farm provides clean energy to the Vietnam's coastal cities and making use of the considerable wind in the coastal areas. Also here, the project has impact on community support, on infrastructure, and the generation of jobs and local revenues. We are very happy to work with pioneers of renewable engagement, such as Tetrapack, who was the first to embrace the gold standard renewable energy label in their direct procurement by choosing our Gold Power product, sourcing the energy attributes for their Thailand production from the aforementioned TSE solar farm in Thailand. Let me wrap up with a few points here. The SDG-driven renewable energy procurement will allow companies to not only focus their renewable energy strategy, but also boost the quality of the energy attribute procurement. This allows them to position their goals as a list of quantifiable impacts and to communicate these impacts in a credible, tangible, and meaningful, recognized way. The tangibility can take various forms. For example, as we see here in the background of this slide, where another client of ours, Novo Nordisk, is visiting their Gold Power wind farm in China. And in order to leave plenty of time for the Q&A, I'd like to say thank you. You find my contact details in the follow-up communication to this presentation. Feel free to approach us. And with that, I hand back over to Sarah for the Q&A.
Thanks a lot, John, and thanks, Jared and Owen. I think we have an excellent foundation for the what and the how, and also a lot about the why, both from a kind of global agenda and also why for the market and for the corporate sector. So with that, I'd like to invite questions from the audience. If you can type your questions into the chat, please. We already see a few coming in. So just bear with us here as I read these and share them with the presenters. There's a question that comes wants to know how the gold standard energy label will or will not relate to similar initiatives like Greenie, Eco Energy, or REC Brazil labels for sustainable RECs. That is, that's the question. Is there anyone that would like to take this in particular?
I could say a couple of words, Sarah, if that's helpful.
Right.
Yeah, maybe I can just start very quickly here, and then I'll give the floor to you as well. This is Jared from Rex International. We do see a wide diversity of labels. Also, if you look at just European labeling systems, there's, of course, Nature Made and Nature Made Star that John will be very familiar with. These are Swiss-based labels. You've got OK Power, Bromil, Yoval, and other types of sustainability labels that you see throughout the marketplace. I think the broad diversity in labels and the broad diversity in this criteria also represents the broad diversity in stakeholder opinions and stakeholder beliefs regarding the development of renewable technologies. So from Rex International's perspective, at least as a stakeholder-led organization working to promote standardization, we're also working to support consumer claims as well. And I think this is definitely one way to do that. By providing this broad diversity, we have the opportunity to also ensure that consumers and clients are really receiving the products that they demand and that they want. I think Gold Standard has shown a very good track record over the last 10 years at least in providing really reliable and robust sustainability criteria, new build criteria, and other types of societal benefits as well. So I'm very supportive that they're also going to be working with REC labeling as well, as this provides a really good opportunity for stakeholders to have access to this type of robust criteria led by Gold Standard. With that, Owen, maybe I'll give you the floor as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. I think that's a really useful summary. And so, as Jared said, there's lots of consumer choice and lots of labels, and inevitably some overlap in some of the elements of those labels in terms of what they're trying to achieve. So, for example, there are safeguards in some of those other labels, and I can't speak to the quality of all of those labels, obviously, here today. But I would confidently stand up and say that Gold Standard will be as strong are stronger really than any other label from a safeguards and inclusivity perspective. That's really our heartland territory. We come at this first and foremost from a sustainable development and stakeholder inclusivity angle. It's what we were founded by WWF for and have 10 plus years of experience in. And so really, if you want the confidence of robust safeguards, stakeholder inclusivity and contribution to the sustainable development goals that can be applied in any country. So that's the other probably aspect, is it's not limited to any particular location in the world, then Gold Standard is a great choice for that. I would also say as well that, I can't speak for some of those bigger labeling mechanisms, but for some of the smaller ones, I'd keep in mind some of the other benefits of working with an experienced scheme like Gold Standard. So we have of the order of 1,400 projects in our portfolio, and of that 1,400, there are a very, very small handful of grievances that Gold Standard has had to investigate. And a standard will never get rid of every problem that a project might come up with, but an experienced scheme that really knows how to handle this stuff, knows how to investigate and put right those issues. And obviously, the smaller the scheme, the less experienced the scheme, the less best practice the scheme, the less certain you can be of that. And so I think there's an element of the quality of the content of the Gold Standard, but also the quality of the governance and mechanism and oversight of the Gold Standard that should be really reassuring as well. That's not to undermine any of those other labels. I can't speak to them, but that would be the points that I would highlight.
John, is there anything you would like to add to that? Thanks, Owen and Jared, or shall we move on to the next question?
Maybe just a small comment, and that is that, especially for multinational corporates who have operations across many continents and geographies, this might provide them with a one recipe to address their renewable energy procurement criteria, rather than turning to a different standard or different label for each of their segmented markets. So this kind of gives them a global tool to apply the same set of rules.
Yep, thanks, John. Then we have a few questions about dollars, both on the kind of project development side and also on the pricing side. So I'd first like to ask Owen to speak to costs for auditing to the extent that that is can be generalized. And then I'll share already with John a comment that says the carbon market is criticized for not working due to too low prices. It is indeed an issue that we all face. That's true. But the question is, what would you say are the practical differences of buying carbon credits versus renewable energy certificates from the Gold Standard or from the market in general? So John, think about that one. And Owen, could you speak briefly to the question about auditing and the costs?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sarah. So I promise to directly answer the question, but I would echo your point that there's a lot of variables. So not super easy to generalize. So just quickly on the variables first, type of project, location of project, scale of project, and any technical challenges the project might face, for example, acute or unique environmental circumstances, indigenous peoples, those things can all affect audit costs. But very generally, sorry, and just to say, I suppose the size of investment doesn't necessarily equate to higher or lower audit fees. Sometimes larger projects are actually easier to audit than smaller, more complex ones. So scale isn't necessarily a great indicator. But having said that, I suppose that a typical Gold Standard project for registration or verification, we would typically see audit prices anywhere from sort of as low as $7,500 if the auditor is based in the same country, for example, seen that in India, for example, or China, up to say $30,000 to $40,000 for more complex investment programs of activity, that kind of thing. So it is a pretty broad range. One of the other critical factors is the quality of submission by the project developer as well. So the auditor can only audit quality information. So the stronger the information provided, the more efficient the audit in typical cases. But I would say that's probably a typical spread.
Thanks, Owen.
Maybe
Jared.
Sarah, there was a question there, and I don't know if we're on this topic yet, but about the differences essentially between voluntary offsets and attribute tracking mechanisms. And I think John can probably mention quite a bit about that, and I can as well. But just let me know if we're ready to answer that portion of the question or not.
Yeah, I think we are. So why don't you lead us off?
John, I'm also going to give you the floor on this as well, because I'm sure you've got a number of different thoughts here. But I think from our perspective within REX International, it's very important to recognize the difference between voluntary offset mechanisms and, of course, attribute tracking certificates. Voluntary offsets were, of course, a best business as usual calculation, proving that there was physically carbon reduced from the atmosphere due to the creation of a project. It was really at its core. Offsets were additionality instruments proving climate additionality in many ways. Attribute tracking certificates are actually fundamentally quite different. Attribute tracking certificates should be seen more as a bookkeeping instrument than anything else. It's a way to prove the origin of the electricity that was consumed from a specific place or a specific location. And that's why labeling is so important in this discussion as well. Because of course, from a bookkeeping instrument, as long as you're procuring in a reliable way that meets good practice criteria, from within single market boundaries, with reliable tracking systems, with all of these very basic criteria, then essentially you're in adherence with what you could say is the accounting standards being CDP or the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. But it's important to look at them beyond just as an accounting instrument, as it would be from this good practice criteria. And part of bringing that accounting mechanism into best practice is by adherence to labels. So ensuring that the renewable electricity that you are procuring is not just renewable electricity, but it's renewable electricity that meets specific sustainability requirements, specific new build criteria as well. And that's an important aspect to make sure that your accounting mechanism is also making a difference on the ground in the country where you're procuring them. John, can I give the floor to you to maybe discuss that a little bit more?
Sure. I fully agree with the explanation you gave on that. I'd just like to reiterate that it is a different instrument for a different market, and the falling price that was mentioned in the question is, of course, also a product of various factors. Not least of them is the political development which is going on in the international community. This, of course, has a huge effect on product owners, product developers, and the revenues from these certifications are, of course, lagging behind expectations, and thus put some project at the critical stage. It is therefore even more important to set a signal by these renewable energy purchases, not only to the operation of a project, but also to the market, seeing that there is a demand for added capacity to the grid. And we expect that this is under an entirely different influence than the carbon market, and we don't expect a price decrease with such a dramatic effect as in the carbon markets to apply to the renewables.
Great. Thanks a lot, John. Shifting gears to a bit of a technical question. So, Owen, I'll ask you to begin on this if you can. If you can elaborate on how the issuance of GSVERs, CERs, so both compliance and voluntary carbon credits, can be issued as well as RECs. And then also if you can elaborate a bit more on the RECs forward window of 12 months. A little bit more technical detail on that.
Yeah, sure. So the gold standard process, for those that don't know, just a very simplified version would be that there's a kind of consultation and engagement piece up front or ex ante that leads to a certification stage we call design certification. So a regular cycle project would typically build after that. So that's really about making sure the design is properly thought through, safeguarded, and included stakeholders' views. And then as we move to the post-implementation or ex-post, then a series of regular verifications which involve a third-party audit on site and a peer review by us. That's what leads to sort of performance certification and issuance of any products like carbon credits or renewable energy certificates. And so just sticking with that post-implementation part. So a project, imagine a project was built and ready to produce megawatt hours from the 1st of January 2015 to the 1st of January 2017, and then verified that period, so had it audited and peer reviewed by us. Then during that period, the megawatt hours are obviously verified as well. That's a relatively easy thing to verify, typically through the regulator's records. And so the megawatt hours are tracked, and then if you are only seeking renewable energy certificates, and that's relatively straightforward because IREX will issue the certificates accordingly per the number of megawatt hours produced. IREX are a one-to-one instrument, and so relatively straightforward. Carbon credits are a little bit more tricky because they depend on a number of factors, like the grid emission factor, for example, and so doesn't necessarily equate 1 megawatt hour to 1 carbon credit for those reasons. But yeah, we will track the total number of megawatt hours issued, and then within that, we'll make sure that the total number of IREX and total number of carbon credits don't add up to more than the megawatt hours that were produced, i.e. there's no double counting or double issuance going on. I would stress again, a project doesn't have to issue both. It can choose to only follow the IREX, the renewable energy certificate label model, or it can choose only to be carbon credits, or a third way is to be both. So like I say, in the case of both, we'll track the megawatt hours and make sure there's no over issuance. And then in terms of the 12-month forward period, so imagine that same example, 1st of January 2017, you have the project verified successfully, and you can issue anything that occurred for the megawatt hours in terms of carbon credits and RECs between the dates of 1st of Jan 2015 and the 1st of Jan 2017, subject to IREX rules, which may be a shorter period. But we'll also now allow you to, if you issue any IREX during the period 1st of January 2017 to 1st of January 2018, you won't have to re-verify to have those labeled as gold standard. So there's a forward period during which gold standard labels can be applied, which is 12 months forward from any verification event that takes place with gold standard. The reason we want to do that, I've already laid out. I think it allows you to be much more on demand and reactive. But the reason we can do it technically where we can't do that for carbon credits is carbon credits do require a sort of degree of monitoring and complexity of calculation that's not quite mirrored in the issuance of renewable energy certificates, which are obviously grid regulated in most circumstances. And so gold standard doesn't have a concern with the way IREX tracks and issues its renewable energy certificates. Whereas compared to, say, the way we label CDM credits, we recheck those calculations at issuance. And so we can't assume a forward period because we can't assume that the UNFCCC gets those calculations right. That's no disrespect to the UNFCCC. That's just the nature of that kind of commodity, really. So that's why we can do it, and the reason we want to do it is because it gives people much more flexibility and a kind of on-demand nature, which I think makes project finance much more sustainable.
Thanks, Owen. And another technical question, if I may, and a clarification on that choice. There's a question about what kind of project needs to demonstrate additionality for the GS label. Is it based on Gold Standard for the Global Goals requirements? So if you can clarify the optionality there.
Yeah, sure. So forgetting renewable energy just for a second, Gold Standard for the Global Goals allows projects to certify just as a project, and so it doesn't require you to seek any kind of financial product like a carbon credit or a renewable energy certificate or any of the others we offer, like water benefits. And if you only do that, then you don't need to prove financial additionality at all. Then we have a requirement that says for certain financial commodities like carbon credits, additionality must be proven. Now, for the case of renewable energy certificate labels, we don't mandate that, we don't require that. So if a project only seeks gold standard renewable energy certificate labels, it does not have to prove additionality. It can choose to, but it does not have to. Whereas if it seeks carbon credits, then it will have to prove financial additionality. If it wants to choose, the inference from that, I suppose, is that if you choose to be able to issue carbon credits and renewable energy certificate labels by following both of those pathways on a project, then yes, financial additionality would have to be proven in that case.
Perfect, thank you. And then we knew it was coming. Back to you, John, to start on the question. Do you have any idea on the market demand regarding the gold standard label and the price? So your input here.
That was inevitable.
Yes, indeed.
So on the happy to take this one. So regarding the market development outlook, we see the dynamics over the past few years in the general renewable energy certificates market. And we also see where this comes from. So while the initial, I'd say, wave came through renewable energy pioneers, such as many of the RE100 members, in their wake, there is a second wave of companies who discovered this solution for their reporting and apply that. This leaves the pioneers kind of standard again. So we've seen the commitments that the large investors in this renewable energy sector, that they look to improve and increase their engagement. And one way we see is to aim to set standards for high quality renewable energy certificates. So we see this as a natural forward development of the increasing demand of the general EAC market development, and want to support that. So this is our motive why we're in this market at all. Regarding the price, of course, this is very different from each geography. So in each market, it is still a young and developing local market, I'd say, with price developments, changing tendencies by the month. While we have more saturated markets such as China, there's also young markets with high demand such as Malaysia or Singapore, but also with more and more countries joining in the Latin Americas. Each of these markets has their own dynamics. So we'd have to see that as a starting point of the price. Then the quality attribute on top of the basic IREG price, of course, depends on the complexity, the size of the project itself. And since this needs to finance all the project activities that also stand for the impacts on the ground and the local communities, this needs to be factored in. It is difficult, therefore, to give a specific answer to where we will see that price-wise. We expect this, and this is just our view on that. Each market participant and offerers of such solutions will have their own angle to it. We expect this add-on quality to come at a premium of roughly 60 to 80%, but please take this number with caution, as it might vary manifold across different markets and different technologies.
Yeah, point taken. We realize that there is it's new and dynamic, but thanks for the remarks. We have just 2 minutes left, and this question is a longer one. So, and I think Jared and Owen might be best placed. So, the question is: I understand that the European Commission has put forward a proposal for a revised renewable energy directive, where they consider to introduce a mandatory system in which member states should auction guarantees of origin originating from power plants receiving support. Do you have any comment to this proposal and the current status on discussions related to the proposal? So very briefly, Jared, do you have a comment to share?
Sure. I mean, just very briefly as well, this is a little bit outside of the scope, of course, of the gold standard sustainability label. It is, of course, a very important development that's taking place. This is one of many developments that has been proposed by the European Commission. The European Commission has delivered their kind of draft renewable energy directive to the European Parliament and also to the European Council. We expect final kind of revised versions of this document from the European Parliament and the European Council within the next 2 or 3 weeks. And at that time, we'll know more about really the developments for the future. I would caution, however, to really take the proposal from the Commission as the leading proposal at the moment, because these directives historically change quite a lot in the process of the Parliament and the Council. And of course, then there's a kind of a process called trilogues, where all three portions of government at European level will also negotiate on the different types of amendments that will happen to the Renewable Energy Directive. So while I didn't address that specific area in particular, I do think that more information will be known here within the next 3 weeks. And you're welcome to contact me or others on the call today for information about this as well.
Thanks, Jared. Perfect. We're at time, but there was one final question that I have the authority to answer. So the question is the label reportable under the GHG protocol? And the answer is yes. So just to close out, thanks everyone. Thanks to Jared, Owen, and John. We will follow up with the recording and the slides for your reference after in the next couple of days. I'll also provide a contact information for the presenters in case you want to reach out with further questions. Definitely, reach out to Gold Standard as we're interested in hearing input from both from technical implementers and from the market. So we hope to continue this conversation and share information with you on an ongoing basis. So thanks a lot for your attention. We'll follow up.